started, Pavlo, do you know anything about Alpha?
It's a good question. Well, actually, we've interviewed somebody from Alpha before, so I guess we're just going back to the loop. And if I would describe Alpha, I would say this is a technology moonshot factory. Could I call it like that? I would actually more love to hear the description from Ollie.
Okay, well, you're jumping ahead, but before we had the pleasure to interview Cecilia Kim. She worked with Alpha before, and we were very inspired by all the conversation we had and the aspect of using cutting edge technology to incubate new ideas, companies, and bring them into real life. And today we come back to Alpha and invited Ollie to join us. And it's actually another direction from all the projects Alpha is doing. And Ollie is working with Alpha Health. And we'll hear more about the company from Ollie's side. But first of all, welcome to the podcast. And we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So would you like to start by giving us a brief introduction of your company and your position?
Of course. Hopefully I won't say anything that disagrees with what Cici said as well. So Alpha is part of Telefonica, which for those of your listeners who don't know is a huge telecommunications company based here in Spain, but is also in the UK and Germany and lots of parts of Latin America as well. And they created Alpha in 2016 to do long-term innovation because they already had a lot of innovation existing in Wayra, in open innovation, and they wanted something that was a bit more long-term, kind of on the model of Google X, to be honest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they established Alpha, and Alpha was always about doing different projects. And Cici, who you've met in the ideation team, so she was thinking of where do we go. But the first project was health. So I joined in 2016 as well to be strategy director and head of ethics for Alpha Health as the first moonshot, really. And we've been working for 4 years since then, really focused on mental health, producing digital therapy, so digital applications that help people improve their mental health all the way from prevention through to treatment. That's the very brief version.
Awesome. And we cannot help but notice your position as both the strategy director, but also the head of ethics for Alpha Health. Did you start with Alpha Health with this position of head of ethics?
No, I didn't actually. So I joined merely as a strategy director. And in the early days when we were working on the strategy for Alpha Health and our positioning and what we thought was going to be really impactful for people's health, we realized that being trustworthy and building trustworthy products was going to be really important to success. And therefore, thinking about ethics, having an ethical position and building that into our strategy was also really important. And we recognized really early on that not only was that important, but to make it real, it needed to be held by someone on the executive team. Mm-hmm. And that person was me. So I became head of ethics alongside my strategy director title as well. And I actually cannot remember how long I've had the head of ethics title. I think it was in principle for a while, and then we sort of recognized, wow, we should really call it that. We called it. So maybe it was a couple of years ago we actually changed the job title, but it was from quite early on that we recognized we need to do this, and I assumed that position.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying you start to recognize you need to do this. What was the trigger event? Like what aspects of the business or the program that make you realize, okay, we really need to focus on ethics while we're developing?
I think it was thinking back to those pre-COVID-19 days, if we can, in 2016. And I joined after Brexit, but before the US election that year. And I think that was 2016 was certainly for me a real kind of watershed year because lots of changes happened. I moved to Spain, and Brexit was voted in, and then of course in the aftermath of both Brexit and the US election, I think people became much more aware of some of the downsides of data access and the importance of privacy. So it was really becoming kind of a leitmotif through lots of conversations in the tech world, and it started to percolate somewhat into people's thinking about health. And I remember at the time there were also lots of stories about people's health data being used in ways that whilst they might not have been bad ways, they certainly weren't ways that had been consented by those individuals. So there was this huge groundswell really of people thinking about this at the time in 2016, 2017. And it was happening as we were basically thinking about our products and the prototyping of our work and the R&D in our work. So it kind of became a natural part of the conversation. And we recognized pretty early that we cannot be one of those companies, one of those technology companies that people think, wow, you're just trying to get my data. So I'm really wary of you because we thought if that happens, people won't use the products. And of course, if they don't use the products, then they won't get the benefit of the products as well. So we were really intentional about that. And I think alongside that, there was also driven in part by the conversations we were having with some of our partners. And we work with hospitals and universities to build our products, as you can imagine. And I remember very vividly early on a conversation with hospital, with the National Health Service in England, in Birmingham, where the clinicians there said, we're building a predictive algorithm. They said, if you can't explain how this algorithm works, then we won't use it.
Sure.
And it was totally fair from their perspective. So okay, that's fine. That means we'll take some of the deep learning techniques off the table. That's no worries. We will use some others, and that's fine. So it does provide some constraints, but it's better to have those constraints up front and know them, and then have the clinicians buy into it and use it. Then it just be not used at all.
Well, first of all, I'm pretty amazed by hearing that you kind of recognize the need to adapt to this trust that it's being developed in customers and users of technology of today. I can help but think, well, on one side, it was your wish of the company to develop in the direction getting trust of people. On the other hand, was there any push? Was it a must by policy, by government's pressure, by anything coming from there?
No, bluntly. So there was no. The legislation isn't really there yet. And I know, of course, GDPR came in during this time frame as well, and I think that's really strong on privacy and also touches on explainability and transparency. So I think it's a good framework, but there isn't yet in place really strong, or really any regulation about ethics to the degree that we looked at it. So we just felt that this is important to us, and we think that we won't be successful without it. Now, there were debates internally. I think this was interesting because one of the questions we wrestled with from the beginning was, well, how does this affect our commercial model? Right. Are we going to be losing out for anything here? And we were very attentive to the challenge of aligning incentives. So our ethics strategy says that we won't make any revenue by basically offering advertising to end users effectively. So we won't be trying to capture their attention and then sell that attention and monetize that attention to advertisers, because we just felt that if we did that, then we weren't working for the end user. We weren't working for you to improve your mental health. We were working for the company that was trying to get your attention, and we just felt that wasn't going to work for us.
Is this what you call ethics by design? Am I right here?
That's one element. I mean, ethics by design has really come up over the past few years, and there's lots of great people working on this. So Greater Than X in Australia, Nathan Kinch and his gang, they're really strong on this, and others as well. But for me, one of the really important parts of ethics by design is the by design part, which means that you have to think about it from the very beginning. And if you don't do that, then you create basically you create ethics debt in the same way that you create tech debt, right? You can try some things out when you build a technology and you prototype it, and the engineers will always say, this is not production quality. I've knocked it together so we can try it, but it's not production quality. And there's something like that in ethics as well. I'll just give you an example of so we asked a company called Etiquas, that's actually also based in Barcelona, to do an audit of one of our prototypes. And that prototype was called Remix. It was about helping young adults kind of feel happier and healthier. And it had a recommendation engine at the heart of it. And we asked Etiquas and University of Pompey Fabra to do an algorithmic assessment of that. And they looked at whether it was biased or not. And the first thing they said was, we can't tell you if it's biased because you've not collected any data that would allow us to. Because you focus so much on privacy that we can't look at bias. And it's one of those moments where, yeah, that's really obvious. Now you've told me that, that's really obvious, but I hadn't thought about that from the beginning. And that's what I mean by this kind of ethics debt, that because we hadn't thought at the beginning, okay, we have a number of principles that we think are important. Privacy is one of those principles, but so is bias. How are we going to trade them off here? Or is there a trade-off when you think about that? And we hadn't thought about that. And so we created this problem. In the end, it was okay because they were able to find kind of indirect sources of evidence and said, okay, we think this isn't biased. But that for me is ethics by design. It's that kind of intentional, what is the purpose of this product? What's the context within it's going to be working, both the context that we intend and the context that people will actually be using it in, because users will use your products in ways you don't always imagine. So you need to at least try and think about that. And then work through, okay, what principles are going to come into play? What are the likely problems? And it's work, right? In the same way that to do the engineering to get it production ready is also work. But if you rush it, you cause problems later on.
Sure. Well, that's some really interesting detail you would never thought about. Like, you take care of the privacy, so the audit couldn't even happening. Since we talk so much about the product, why don't you give us like a brief introduction about how users interact with the product and what the benefits and the end result people should get?
Sure. We have a suite of products that are in various stages. The core one that is out there now and that we're offering to businesses, so it's a business to business model that we have, is a product called Evermind, which is about stress and resilience. So it's about helping you manage your stress and building your resilience. And it's really aimed at kind of preventing ill health later on. And we launched it at the beginning of the year. We've gone through all these prototyping in previous years, but we launched it. And then, of course, COVID happened. And that was a good thing and a challenging thing. And it was a good thing because of course, the kind of demand was going up. So lots of people were asking for it. It was kind of unfortunate that was the case, that people were more stressed, but it meant that we were able to get out there a bit more. But it was also challenging because it's like, well, everyone is now trying to kind of get into this. So how do we make our way in this market? So we've got Evermind, which we're continuing to improve all the time, and we've got some good traction in the market. And then we also have a couple of digital therapeutics. So these are products that are actually the treatment, where the app is the cognitive behavioral therapy, and we have one that's called Mindset, which still requires a clinician to help you understand what your needs are, and you'll go to your doctor and she or he will say, okay, well, actually, I think you could benefit from Mindset, and then they will offer that to you, and they will still be there in the background because there's a sort of dashboard for the doctor, if you like, so they can monitor your progress. And that we've just building in Boston, and actually it's now ready, and so people are starting to use that, starting to be rolled out. And then there's a sister version of that application which won't require the clinician. And of course, that then requires us to go through a regulatory process, which we're doing. So we're great friends with the FDA and talking to them and going through that clinical trial process. But that's our intention, is to try and cover the spectrum of need, from prevention, which is what Evermind does, all the way through to the treatment, which is where mindset, which is that first treatment product, and then perspective, the second one, come in.
And you've said a couple of words about COVID, how it changed the market, how it changed the demand. How did it impact your product development? Maybe you developed new tools or had some new ideas.
Yeah, we did. We developed some specific COVID content. Some of that was about managing working from home, actually, because of course that's quite different for people, managing the stress or being worried about COVID. So we developed some specific content for that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great, because especially in these times where healthcare system is so overwhelmed, lots of friends of mine have truly hard times going through COVID. That's great that you responded in this kind of way.
How did you come about designing the product? How do you know? Because you need to go usually from research experiment and then go to the customer. But facing this kind of abrupt event, how do you react as fast?
Well, we were, in some ways, I would say we were lucky, but I think you don't really want to use the word luck around something like COVID, because no one wished COVID on the world. But what we positioned ourselves to focus on stress after having done lots of work. So I mentioned that Alpha Health started in 2016. So we spent a lot of time working on this preventative product. So when we first started in 2016, we agreed that there were going to be two tracks. There was the more clinical track that we started quickly because it takes a while to go through the regulatory process. So we started that as soon as we could. And then we started turning our minds to the more preventative side of things. And we did lots of experiments, and we prototyped with different ways of different value propositions.
Okay.
So, for instance, we initially were looking at a very broad value proposition, which was more like well-being and happiness, and it was really kind of super preventative. And what we found through a couple of iterations of that prototyping over time was that the people who were most benefiting from it and most using it were people who would describe themselves as being stressed. So actually, during 2019, we recognized, well, actually, this is a real thing. And you look at the statistics on stress, and that's it was becoming more of a challenge in the workplace and something that people were really wanting some answers to. And we were also seeing that lots of people use meditation and it works really well for them, but lots of people try meditation and it doesn't work for them. So we wanted to offer a product that was more than meditation, and it had a suite of different evidence-based interventions. And that's really what Evermind is. And so Evermind was ready kind of just in time. And then COVID-19 comes along and loads more people are stressed than they ever have been before. But because we'd done the groundwork, it was already had a good foundation. And then it meant that we could see that, okay, this is a real need. So the feature roadmap that we had could be quite quickly turned into more kind of COVID-19 focused content. And some of it was the things that we thought about before, like sleep, for instance, was still relevant anyway. So it kind of just accelerated everything.
Yeah. And throughout the process, do you kind of further reinforce your ideas and research with consumers engaging with the app and using the product? I assume it's a big process of data exchange, collection, and the further analysis. What are some precautions you take in this process in terms of privacy, ethics, and bias?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a mix of the qualitative work that we will do, but the user research team will recruit people, test ideas with them. Obviously, that used to be in person, but now isn't. It's through video calls like this, and then we make sure that we try and recruit usually a representative sample of users, so that at least from the beginning there, we know that we can be more assured that we won't have a bias coming into our work. And then, of course, on the other side, we also have the data that we collect through the application as well, and that we actually only collect limited amounts of data through the application, because we're really attentive to the need to have a proper value exchange with the user, so that we can say, well, we'll collect this data, which means then we can offer you these services. What we don't do is just collect loads of data in the hope that we can then offer new services. If we need a new type of data because we think we need it for a new feature. So, for instance, if we needed GPS data because we thought that would be really good for a new feature, we don't collect that through Evermind. What we do for that is our research team will build a little prototype that can collect that data, and then it will be specifically consented through kind of a research prototype. So until we know that we can get value, we actually then don't collect that data. So we try and practice that data minimization as a really important part of the ethics, so that the user doesn't feel, hang on, you're just hoovering all this data up, and I get some value back, but am I getting a fair exchange back? So we try and be really, really fair in that way.
And you've mentioned a couple of times privacy, which is really important, of course, and also transparency, I believe, about your technology. What are the key issues, ethical issues that you have discovered throughout the product development process, and how did you respond and maybe pivoted to address them?
I think another big one is bias, and thinking about bias in Evermind and bias in Mindset and the other products. And one area of work that we've spent a lot of time on that I'm really pleased with is the language we use and the visuals that we use as well. And the team, the design team, have been really, really keen on this. And we worked with an external company called The Other Box, based in the UK, who are very good at understanding biases and helping you as a company to understand your biases. And then we created some kind of design guides for language and for visuals. And the team have been really good at working on those together. And now, just the other week, we were having a debate about we were representing a person in Mindset, and was saying, do we want someone who is definitely a man or definitely a woman, or kind of more gender non-binary, and talking about how different people would perceive that, whether they'd notice that. So we spend a lot of time kind of thinking about this, testing it internally, and then, of course, kind of putting it to external, in our qualitative work as well, actually trying to understand how users think about it as well. So that's an area of work on the bias side that I'm really pleased, because lots of people think about bias only in relation to data, and of course that is really important as well. But it's also important to think about it from the perspective of the look and feel and the language.
Very interesting when you mentioned when ethic comes to part of the thinking process. Not only you have more debates about how to design products, you also, as the previous example you brought us, every research and implementation, you need to do it with a small group, and you need to make sure that methodology work until you push it to the market. As a company that's very tech-centric, it seems that the whole idea about ethics is slowing down the process, and sometimes it may mean cutting off the competitive edge of the company if your competitors just move forward more audaciously with ideas. How does that position you in terms of the whole company, the team? Do people like you, or do people think, oh, he's a troublemaker?
Oh, that is a great question. So sometimes there is definitely a bit of pushback. I think that's fair. What I find is that culturally, everyone here really buys into exactly what we're doing on ethics, thinks it's really important, and they see the value of it. That does sometimes cause problems in terms of the processes we use, because of course the team like using an agile process and they want to move quickly. But the way that we manage that is I then work with the different teams to say, well, how do we build this in an iterative way? Mm-hmm. Because you need to think upfront about some of it, but you don't necessarily need to think about all of it. And we can learn as we go. And I'm not saying we have this solved yet in any way, shape, or form, because we certainly don't. And we're going to embark on some more work on this in the new year, actually, particularly on the research side. But that's the approach that we're trying to take, to make it that kind of iterative. Let's do step by step, and then improve from there. But in terms of the competitive edge, I think that particularly because of the market we're in and because we're selling to businesses and to hospital, to health providers, they always ask about this kind of work. So they will ask about your privacy, our privacy policies. They'll ask about how do we manage our data. They'll ask about how we've thought about bias. The fact that we can actually give answers to these things and say we have thought about this and we have done this is really important to those companies, and they do recognize it. And it is something that comes up time and time again. They go, actually, we really like that you've done that, and you don't need to move as quickly as you might do perhaps in a direct-to-consumer model. Although I think even in the consumer market, it's a bit like tech debt, right? You can move quickly initially and get something out there, but then maybe you regret it afterwards if actually you find there's an unintended consequence that you haven't thought about. So yeah, we're comfortable with the balance at the moment.
No, sure. That was just me being like throwing hard questions, but I definitely.
No, it's a legit question. Totally legit question. You debate it.
Term, that's what really increases the competency and solves a lot of potential headaches for the company. Yeah. But with that being said, like I know many companies, they're trying to do it right, do it well, but like building this culture of making ethic first when you're designing a product, running a company is very tricky. But as the head of ethics, how do you start to develop this culture within Alpha Health?
The way we did it was we partly was helped because we were new, and we could build it in from the very beginning of all of our work and all of our strategy. So it was there from day one that we were doing this. And then the other aspect that was really important is that we just debated it internally. So we've had lots of kind of those town hall meetings where we talked about what's this going to mean for us commercially, but what about our speed to all the kind of things that you've articulated, exactly the questions that we've debated as a team. So the people that have been here from the beginning have grown up with this and imbibed it, so it's become part of the culture. And of course, new people coming in see that as well. So I think we're in a sense lucky that we were able to do it from the very beginning, although we intended to do that from the very beginning. I think if we were a company that was that had been around for 10 years and we decided that, oh wow, let's do this, it would be a lot harder because it really does go to your DNA, because it's really about who you are as a company and what you stand for. There's a real theme I find, I don't know if you find this at the moment in the debate, where there's a sense of we'll just add ethics. I'll just here's a cup of ethics, or just pour a bit of ethics onto our business. It doesn't work like that at all.
And how do you ensure that this ethical culture stays in the company? What are the levers and maybe accountability levers for your department as well to be held accountable in the future?
Yes. Great question. So internally, we have an ethics committee, which is just people who are working in different teams that are ones that are really interested, and they will bring ideas and they'll take things back to their team. So that allows some engagement. So that's one thing. Secondly, we do continue talking about this openly in the sort of town halls, all hands meetings that we have. Of course, I'm responsible for this at the exec level. So that means there's a senior voice. But that's all easy stuff to do because it's internal. So hold ourselves to account, we try and publish. And so we publish what our ethics strategy is so that people can read it. And then if we're not doing it, they can call us out. And it's one of the reasons why we did the external ethics audit, so that someone else could mark our home. Because it's really easy for us to say, oh, we think we're amazing, we're doing a great job. And there's lots of areas where we're doing an okay job. There's lots of areas where we just haven't really started enough yet, to be honest. And that kind of external audit is hugely important, because otherwise, you don't have strong accountability. So we've created this situation where other people can hold us to account.
So you basically created this channel for feedback to realize, where are we standing now?
Yeah.
Have you ever received any feedback from your users regarding ethics?
Yeah, we have actually. We've received some feedback. They wouldn't call it ethics because we don't say, well, this is an ethical thing. We just sort of do stuff and see how they react. But we had some feedback. We've had feedback about accessibility, for instance, because we have a bit of audio in Evermind, and that doesn't work for deaf people. So we're sort of thinking a bit about, well, how can we improve accessibility for people who, I think you'll both appreciate this because you live in Barcelona. One of our prototypes called Remix was actually in Spanish. As you know, the Spanish language is very gendered. So we use a sort of non-gendered version of Spanish where we could in Remix. And we got quite a lot of feedback on that one. Some people really liked it and other people just thought it was just too much and they didn't like it at all. But yeah, people do feedback on this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. Those are the things that it's really hard to think about all the details that might pop up afterwards. Also go back to when we talk about outside auditing for your company. Because we all know it's hard for us ourselves to say, okay, we're ethical. But when you invite someone to examine your company, your culture, your product to say you're ethical, how do you choose this person or company who audit you? Because it could be anyone or there's industry standard. What's the situation now?
I think it's a bit better now, but when I started looking for someone to help with this and to do the auditing work, there really wasn't anyone, and there were very few organisations looking at this. And I cannot remember how we came across Gemma Galvin and Etikas, but maybe the fact that we were both in Barcelona helped. But I was really paying attention to all the debates and sort of came across them and thought, well, actually, this is the only company I've really seen that is doing this work. And they just started this concept of ethics audits, which is still pretty new. And they've now done 20 or so of them. So they've got a pretty good handle on how to do it. But the truth is there's no standard. And actually that's kind of what makes it stimulating and interesting to do, because whatever you do, you end up contributing to what the standards should be. You just have to be happy to take some risks and accept that we'll get some stuff wrong, and the way that we're thinking about it now will probably look desperately unsophisticated in 5 years' time when everyone's worked out how to do this. But at the moment, there's very few people doing this. And, I think we were fortunate to come across Gemma and the Etikas team.
Cool. And did they figure out something that Alpha Ethics is doing terribly wrong?
They didn't come up with anything that we're doing terribly wrong, but there were definitely some areas where they thought we could improve. And so one of those areas was the way that we manage consents is fine, but not as good as we'd like. So there are some cases where we're absolutely meeting what GDPR says you should do, so totally compliant, but they would say, well, actually, you could do more. So you could think about more granular consenting. You could think about more layering of that. So you introduce it at different moments in the application, and that's something that we've done differently in different applications. And I don't think we have a right answer to it yet. So we continue to play around with it. They absolutely call us out on transparency as well, because we weren't great at that initially. We spent a lot of time doing the work internally, and I think for the reason of kind of wanting to get some stuff done before we really talked about it much. So we were a bit late in publishing some of our work. I think that would be fair to say, but we're trying to catch up with ourselves now. I think those are the main. Actually, the other thing I would say is document more, because of course when they're doing the audit, it's great if everything is brought together in a really clear way. But because we were making new processes and new ideas, and it was a bit scrappy and startup-y, there were lots of things that weren't quite as well documented as they might be. So they said, look, you can really improve there as well.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. But I believe even if you sometimes even if if you're documenting everything and everything seems fine, like sometimes technology just goes in the direction where you didn't expect it to go. I mean, let's take an example. I'm sure you heard of Facebook being used in Myanmar to do horrible things and genocide. And in these kind of cases, I can help but think, who should be responsible for that? Like, should the companies be responsible for that, which they could not foresee back then? Should the governments be responsible for that? The users of the community? What would be your answer to this question?
I think in the first instance, it is the company that has a responsibility to think about these things. And it's not true to say that you can't do anything to think about it. You can absolutely spend some time thinking about how might this be used in nefarious ways. So when I worked in government, we always used to say, how could an unreasonable person think about this unreasonably? And so you can at least put your mind in a person who might try and abuse your system. You won't be able to come up with everything, of course. But I think if you're a company that can say, look, we did some work thinking about this, and here's what it came up with, and actually we didn't predict this one, then you've at least gone some way towards demonstrating that you've done some work. And probably in doing that thinking, you'll have come up with some strategies that might help with the scenario you may not have thought about. So it will probably still be helpful for you to some extent. But I think in the first instance, it probably is the company, but the government also needs to get more involved in this as well. And I think this is where the challenge of technology really comes to the fore, because of course it's so international. And Facebook's a US company, and it absolutely is complying with US law, and it's complying with all the laws of the different countries it's operating in. And then you find this is where the relativism of ethics comes to we can get into real deep ethics here if we want to, but what's considered good or bad in Myanmar may not be the same as what's considered good and bad in the US. And who adjudicates that, right? It's actually not easy to come up with an answer to that, and I'm not going to pretend to now. So I sort of feel for Facebook in that instance, but I think companies do have a responsibility to try and think about the unintended consequences, even if they won't get them all right.
Yeah.
Well, it was very interesting, and I believe, congratulations on on taking this first initiative and becoming, I think one of the first companies who see it as their responsibility to incorporate ethics into their company gene. I guess for any company that wants to be more ethical, start from the beginning is the best option, and try to think in advance how you will manage data collection and data processing, about bias as well, and also how to hold yourself accountable in the years to come.
Yeah, I have my takeaways as well. I think it's actually very comforting to hear you revealing all the details to us, because right now we know many companies, their goal when they're digesting all the new laws, legislations, how we can go around and take advantage of things that laws aren't covering. But however, with companies that take ethics into their core, they're actually looking line by line to see, okay, how we can comply or even do better than what is required. So as consumers or as legislation, as companies, we all need to participate in the whole process. And I believe Alpha Health is definitely being a good role model. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today, Oliver. If people want to reach out and keep in contact with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
You can find me on LinkedIn, actually. That's always
okay. We'll put your link on our website.
I was just going to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. And any cool projects and about the app, we'll share them with our audience through our website as well. So thank you very much. Hopefully we'll get to see you in person soon in Barcelona.
Real pleasure. Lovely to talk to you both.
So that is our episode with Ollie. I hope that inspires some of your thoughts about ethic and give you some exposure about where companies nowadays are into and what their efforts are and what are the legislation and the problem we are facing. If you like the episode, please leave us a comment or not. Leave us some feedback as well. We appreciate any participation. And as always, you can also support us on our Patreon. And that's it for today.
Meanwhile, we're also offering services in data science. So if you're interested in making your data more valuable and bringing it, adding value from it to your company, reach out to us through our social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, or to our email. We'll leave the links in our description. See you in the next one.
See you.